Hi everyone, welcome back to Radio Night Crime. Before you drift off, let me know in the comments where you're listening from. If you're enjoying the stories, don't forget to like and subscribe. Now let's relax and jump into tonight's case. Story 1. The dark mystery of the disappearance is solved 14 years later. Investigating certain crimes can take years or even decades due to a lack of evidence or witnesses. Sometimes investigations are intentionally misled to create confusion or send investigators down the wrong path. Many such cases eventually end up on the shelves of archives as unresolved. However, crimes involving life-ending actions and abuses of various degrees of severity generally have no statute of limitations, and investigations can be reopened at any time when new information surfaces. Cases related to the disappearance of individuals, particularly minors, are often solved on hot tracks. It is believed that the first 3 days are critical when there is a high likelihood of finding the person alive. Thereafter, the chances of an outcome rapidly diminish. The case of the missing German schoolgirl from Berlin, Georgina Kruger, was investigated for over 10 years and was considered one of the most mysterious in the history of German criminology. The girl disappeared during the day on her way home from school, having traveled just a few dozen meters from her home. No evidence, leads, or witnesses were found, and although the investigation was periodically reopened, there was little hope of solving the crime. However, thanks to meticulous work by undercover agents, the criminal was eventually exposed. What is known about Georgina Kruger and her family? Georgina, or simply Gina Kruger, was born on April 11, 1992 in Munich and was the middle child of 3 in a simple family. She grew up with her older brother Tommy, who was 8 years her senior, and her younger sister Michelle, who was 2.5 years her junior. When Gina turned 11, her parents decided to separate, and her older brother, who was then 19, chose to live with their father. After the divorce, the girls were primarily raised by their mother Vesna and their grandmother on their mother's side. Both girls did well in school, were involved in music and dance, and were creative by nature. The family lived modestly, and while their father maintained contact with his ex-wife and daughters, he was more focused on supporting his elder son, whom he funded through school and supported in various ways. In June 2006, Vesna moved with her mother and daughters to Berlin, where she had been offered a well-paying job. The family settled in the Mobit district at House No. 8 on Stendal Street. On September 1st, the sisters attended one of the best local schools, which, although located in a different district, was accessible by bus. Vesna was very pleased with her new job and had big plans for the future, but soon the peaceful and measured life of the family was shattered. She dreamed of becoming an actress. From childhood, Gina loved to sing and dance, engaging in these activities seriously and with full dedication. Inspired by Indian films, she dreamed of an acting career and enthusiastically participated in school theater, as well as attending acting and stage speech courses. Teachers working with young Kruger noted that she definitely possessed the necessary talents, and thus predicted her future success and fame. Moreover, the girl had a bright, expressive appearance, a slender feminine figure, and was quite tall for her age. She took meticulous care of herself, keeping up with fashion trends, striving to dress stylishly, and use decorative cosmetics skillfully and intelligently. It's worth noting that Georgina applied makeup as well as professional makeup artists, often doing makeup for her friends and neighbors back in Munich. In Berlin, during the summer holidays, she actively attended various castings, trying to break into the big screen or television. She managed to appear in crowd scenes a few times, but these were very inconspicuous episodes. However, on Friday, September 22, 2006, luck finally smiled at her. She auditioned for a guest role in the television series, Turkish for Beginners, and her candidacy was approved. Gina was supposed to receive a call back on Monday, September 25th, to finalize her inclusion in the cast, discuss details, and invite her to sign a contract. The new beauty in town in her new school, the young beauty caused a real stir from the first day, capturing the attention of all the boys in her class. However, she struggled to get along with the girls as they openly envied her and saw her as a competitor. Her classmates were slow to accept her into their group and communicated with her reluctantly. Although Gina was sociable, friendly, and open, avoided conflicts, and tried to interact with all the kids in the class. The teenage girl was indeed very beautiful, danced well, sang, and even received an offer from a modeling agency to try herself as a photo model. She agreed, but unfortunately, she never made it to the planned photo session in early October. Gina dreamed that one day she would make it to Hollywood or Bollywood where she would act in movies. She imagined herself on the red carpets of prestigious film festivals, among celebrities, dreaming of fame, recognition, film awards, and was ready to work hard on herself to achieve her desires. The schoolgirl almost made it happen, when suddenly she disappeared without a trace, a few miles from home. So the schoolgirl was awaiting confirmation of her role in the TV series, and she had no doubts about it. All weekend, Georgina could think of nothing else but the upcoming call from the studio, which was set to decide her fate. She was excited and inspired, already imagining herself on set and working on her lines. On Monday, September 25th, as usual, she headed to school in the morning. She was supposed to return home by 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and since the call was expected in the late afternoon, Gina asked her grandmother to answer all calls, promising not to linger anywhere. The day dragged on endlessly for Kruger. Her classmates noticed that she seemed tense, constantly checking the time, and unable to focus on her lessons. Since she hadn't told anyone about her participation in the casting, her anxious state was interpreted differently by everyone. When school ended, Georgina, having gathered her belongings, hurried to the nearest bus stop, got on bus number 27, which she rode daily, and headed home. After traveling 3 stops, she got off at Rue Retnover, which was a short distance from her house. However, she never made it home, vanishing somewhere halfway from the stop to her apartment. Georgina Kruger was never seen again, neither alive nor deceased. Search for the missing schoolgirl by 2 o'clock in the afternoon. The grandmother, who was waiting for the granddaughters to return from school, had prepared lunch and set the table. Georgina was supposed to return first, and Michelle a bit later, since she had additional classes at the music school that day. But the older granddaughter did not show up, which was very strange because she was eagerly awaiting the call and had no plans to stay out. When Michelle arrived home at 3 o'clock, the grandmother grew anxious and started calling Gina to find out where she had vanished. But the schoolgirl's phone was turned off. Subsequent attempts to reach her also failed. The anxiety grew, and when Vesna returned from work and learned that her daughter was missing and her mobile was unreachable, she realized something serious had happened. The first thing the mother did was call the school, where she was informed that Kruger had attended all her classes and had left by bus as usual. Then the woman contacted several of her daughter's friends, hoping that the girls had simply got caught up talking or had stopped at a cafe on their way home, but they said that Georgina was in a hurry and had headed straight home. The concerned women then went to the police station and reported the disappearance of the 14-year-old girl. However, the law enforcement initially took a skeptical view, suspecting that the schoolgirl might have gone on a date, visited someone among friends, or had an argument with a classmate and was sulking alone somewhere in a park. After exhausting all possible scenarios and verifying that the teenager was nowhere to be found in any of the anticipated locations, detectives began checking reports of accidents and calling hospitals, assuming that the girl might have encountered trouble, suffered an injury, or been harmed on her way home from school. But Gina had not been admitted to any hospital either. As the night approached, extensive searches and witness interviews began. It turned out that the girl was last seen at the bus stop when she exited the bus and turned onto the street leading to her home. The schoolgirl was dressed in blue jeans with wear marks, a light blue t-shirt, a denim jacket, and gray sneakers. She carried a pink sports bag with a long, wide strap, which contained her notebooks, textbooks, and her mobile phone. Investigators were able to track the girl's movements through her device's signal. She indeed spent the entire day at school, then boarded the bus and got off at her stop. But approximately halfway to her home, the signal suddenly disappeared and never reappeared. The search began on Stendhal Street, where the Kruger family lived. A search team with dogs trained to detect the scent of living or deceased humans was dispatched there. At that point, there was still hope of finding the teenage girl alive and unharmed. Vanished into thin air, law enforcement checked every home, interviewed all residents and potential witnesses, inspected attics and basements, spoke with workers at local stores and cafes, but no one had seen Georgina, and even dogs could not pick up her trail. By the next morning, flyers with the schoolgirl's photos and requests for any information about her had been posted all over the city. Dozens of calls came into the police station, reporting sightings of a similar-looking girl in different parts of the city, but, unfortunately, all leads turned out to be false. Concurrently, investigators began to follow up on all previously convicted local residents, as well as those who had been released on bail. Special attention was given to criminals and those who had shown an unhealthy interest in minors. However, all these efforts yielded no results. The schoolgirl seemed to have vanished into thin air, not making it home. No traces or personal belongings were found, as if she had never existed at all. False lead. After several months of fruitless searching, the investigation was suspended as there were no leads, not a single clue, and no idea which direction to pursue. However, about a year after Georgina's disappearance, an anonymous call came into the police station, with the unknown caller claiming that the girl's body rested at the bottom of a nearby lake. Authorities were unable to identify the caller, but they clung to this piece of information and decided to investigate it. For several weeks, highly skilled divers combed the lakebed using advanced equipment. It can be said with certainty that they examined virtually every inch, but found no trace of Kruger. The lead turned out to be false, but it nevertheless rekindled public interest in the case. The media actively discussed and wrote about the missing girl again, so it was decided to conduct another search operation. The police re-interviewed neighbors and brought in search dogs, although it was clear that this would likely yield no results. The dogs had been unable to pick up the girl's scent on the day of her disappearance, so there was little hope for success after a whole year. Investigators were confident that the schoolgirl was no longer alive, but the Kruger family members refused to believe this. Vesna concocted a legend for herself, according to which her daughter had run away to India and was now starring in Bollywood films, dancing and singing as she had always dreamed. The woman consoled herself with these thoughts and continued to live for the sake of her younger daughter. The monster next-door search efforts periodically resumed, and in 2016, nearly a decade after a girl's disappearance, a resident of Stendhal Street contacted the police to complain about a neighbor who was actively inviting underage girls over to his place. This neighbor turned out to be a 35-year-old immigrant from Turkey named Ali K. He was legally married, raising 3 children, and tried to appear as an exemplary family man to those around him, but in reality he was not. Upon closer inspection of Ali, and after studying his personality, the police were horrified as 4 years prior, he had already been under investigation. At that time, he deceitfully lured a local schoolgirl, promising to sell her a trendy smartphone at a symbolic price. He took the girl to his storeroom, located in the basement of the apartment building, struck her on the head, and coerced her into intimate closeness. Afterward, he made the teenager swear she wouldn't tell anyone about what happened, then gave her a paper napkin to wipe her tears, and helped her tidy up before leaving. The girl promised to remain silent just to escape from the clutches of the monster, but as soon as she was free, she immediately told her parents about the incident, and together they went to the police to report the violent actions. The schoolgirl detailed the man's storeroom in the basement, noting that it looked more like a maniac's den. Ali was arrested the same day, but he vehemently denied his guilt and shared his own version of the events. According to him, he was indeed selling the gadget, and the girl herself expressed a desire to buy it. As the smartphone was in his basement storeroom, they went down together, and when the guest examined the device, she said that she had always dreamed of such a gadget, but since she didn't have the money, she was ready to pay in another way. Following this, according to Ali, the girl began kissing him and started undressing, and he, trying to reason with her, pushed her away forcefully, causing her to fall and hit her head. This explained the injury and bruises on her body, but the fact of intimate closeness could not be proven as the man had used a contraceptive, which he later disposed of. Ali's wife, Malik, fully supported her husband, and also began accusing the girl of indecent behavior and attempts to seduce her husband. Ultimately, the man only received a suspended sentence for causing moderate bodily harm. Nonetheless, now as the police took up the investigation of the disappearance of Kruger again, they decided to check him thoroughly once more. Ali K. did not have a permanent job and got by on odd jobs, mainly living on benefits. He loved gambling and often incurred debts, was a regular visitor to the Turkish coffee shop on the ground floor of his building, where he made acquaintances with different people who treated him to food and drinks. The man carefully maintained his appearance, desperately trying to look younger than his years. He wore fashionable clothes, sometimes even spending children's benefits on them. But the main oddity about this man was his attraction to girls. He continually tried to meet teenagers, asked them inappropriate questions, and also offered strange and illegal things, for instance, help with buying alcohol or cigarettes. Ali most resembled the role of Georgina's abductor, but the police had nothing against him in this case. New investigation nevertheless. The Kruger case was reopened, and a new investigation was initiated due to the emergence of a new suspect. Ali K. was brought to the station and questioned, but he naturally denied any involvement in the decade-old case. His storage room in the basement was inspected, but no traces of the missing schoolgirl were found. Detectives noted that this space indeed seemed more like a meeting place than a storage area. It turned out that 10 years ago he had been questioned along with other neighbors, and his basement had been inspected. But specifically, Ali's storage room had not been checked because, firstly, there was no reason to, and secondly, according to residents, the door always had a lock, so only the owner could access it. Ali himself had been an active participant in the search operation at that time and was one of its most engaged members. Despite the fact that the police had nothing concrete to charge K with, they decided to keep him under surveillance to learn as much as possible about him. Unofficial monitoring was organized, and all his phone calls were intercepted. Soon this provided initial results, and detectives discovered that the man had significant debts unknown to his wife. He had lost about 10,000 euros in poker and had no idea how to get out of this predicament. The investigation decided to focus on this aspect. Undercover agents, the decision was made to introduce an undercover agent into the suspect's close circle, who was expected to gain his trust, extract the necessary information, and secure an on-record confession. However, everything had to be done slowly and carefully so the suspect wouldn't become suspicious and would feel secure. For this purpose, a special agent codenamed Hakan was prepared and sent in, posing as a successful businessman who had recently moved to the Mobit area to open a car service station. A couple of times he visited the cafe in Ali's building, where he loudly discussed business plans and details with a partner. As they left, the partner mentioned that they needed to find a manager soon, noting that it was a well-paying position and it was important to choose wisely. After these words, the second man left, and Hakan stayed to finish his coffee, when suddenly Ali approached and sat at his table. He took the bait and immediately offered himself for the manager position. A conversation ensued, which quickly turned into a casual chat, and the businessman noted that Ali might fit the role, then mentioned the salary. Ali's eyes lit up at the figure. He began dreaming of paying off his debts and buying the sports car he had always wanted. The men exchanged phone numbers, and from that day on, they began to communicate regularly, and their relationship quickly grew into a friendship. Hakan even started taking Ali on business trips to other cities, aiming to get closer to him and gain his trust. But this friendship had the opposite effect, as the suspect strived to appear as the best version of himself to his prospective employer. He boasted of his achievements, even the most minor ones, and preferred to keep silent about any wrongful acts. Several months later, realizing that the case was not progressing, the investigation decided to introduce another agent, this time a woman, who would play Hakan's girlfriend. This introduced Susan into the story, whose goal was to befriend Ali's wife, Melek, and try to uncover any secrets the husband might be keeping. It only took a few meetings for them to get along, after which all four started socializing as families. Melek was a sociable woman, but regarded her husband as nearly a saint. For years, she had turned a blind eye to his infidelities, did not believe the schoolgirl who accused him of violence, and was convinced that her husband was a very good person, just unlucky with jobs. But now everything would change. Soon, Susan realized that Ali's wife wasn't just covering for him. She truly believed that he was simply incapable of harming anyone. The agents even decided to use a trick by spreading a rumor that there was progress in the Kruger case, and an unnamed source had indicated where to find her body. Hakan left a newspaper with this article in his car, which Ali had started borrowing occasionally. Several cameras and recording devices were also installed in this car. When the suspect and his wife got into the car, she soon noticed the newspaper left behind, quickly skimmed the article, showed a bit of surprise that the case was still being investigated, and then indifferently put the paper aside. It became clear that Melek knew nothing about this. Otherwise, she would have inadvertently revealed herself. Good cop, bad cop. 6 months later, the investigation finally concluded that their plan had failed. The K family had become friends with the agents, even trusting them to look after their children, but no confessions were forthcoming. Ali strived to appear honest and upright, and his wife was simply unaware of the crime her husband had committed. Moreover, maintaining their cover was becoming increasingly expensive. They even had to lease a space for the supposed auto repair shop and signed a sham employment contract with the man to avoid raising his suspicions. The investigation then took a desperate last step by introducing another agent who would play a villainous role. According to the backstory, his name was Kor, he was Hakan's cousin, had a criminal record, and was running some underground business. It was hoped that Ali, meeting a kindred spirit, would open up and confess his sins. The men quickly bonded over their shared interests. Kor treated his new friend to drinks, and together they visited various clubs and houses of ill repute. The new friend confessed that he made money through not entirely legal means, and thus wanted to spend it indulgently, with Ali willingly helping him in this. Simultaneously, Kor constantly complained about his girlfriend, with whom he supposedly could not break up because she was blackmailing him and threatening to report his illegal business to the police. According to him, she constantly demanded money, and her appetites were growing. One day, while having drinks with his friend, Kor declared that he intended to rid himself of the bothersome blackmailing girlfriend in a radical way, and was willing to pay a sum of 100,000 euros to anyone who would do the dirty work. Ali perked up at this and offered to take on the task himself. His friend agreed, but suggested they discuss the details in a secluded place when sober. Monstrous confession in November 2017. Sitting in the agent's car, the men discussed the plan to eliminate his girlfriend. At one point, Kor doubted whether Ali was capable of taking a life. In response, Ali revealed something he claimed no one else knew. He confessed that more than 11 years ago, he had taken a life of someone with his bare hands. Ali said that in 2006, a stunning young girl had moved onto his street, who completely captivated him. She passed by his house twice a day on her way to and from school, so he had memorized her schedule and would step out to greet her and pay compliments. Despite her young age, he described her as hot, and he burned with desire for her. One warm September day, when the girl was returning from school and the street was unusually quiet and deserted, Ali saw his chance. He asked a neighbor girl to help him move some items from his storage area, and she kindly agreed, not sensing any danger. Once they were in the basement, he locked the door and tried to kiss the schoolgirl, who struggled and screamed. He then knocked her unconscious with a blow to the head and took advantage of her. After the incident, afraid she might report him to the police, he decided not to let her go. He grabbed her throat with his hands and squeezed as hard as he could. Ali described the process in detail, explaining how he felt the crunch and sensed the pulse in her neck fade away. The girl's body lay in the basement for several days, so if the search team had looked into his storage area, they would have immediately uncovered the perpetrator. But no one suspected anything, and once the commotion had died down, he wrapped the body in an old rug and disposed of it in a garbage bin, which went directly to the landfill. Ali's confessions were recorded on a camera installed in Kor's car, and by the evening of that same day, he was taken into custody. Unfortunately, the girl's remains were never found, as the waste at the landfill was regularly incinerated, and her body was essentially cremated. The trial and verdict, the hearings in this case, lasted another 2.5 years before a final verdict was delivered to the criminal. He adamantly denied any wrongdoing, claiming that he had fabricated the entire story to gain Cora's trust. But in reality, he planned to rescue his girlfriend by turning in his friend to the police as soon as he received the money. No other evidence was found besides the criminal's own confession, however. His detailed and vivid account was enough to convince the jury of this man's guilt. In March 2020, nearly 14 years after Georgina's disappearance, Ali K. was sentenced to life imprisonment, with no possibility of ever being released. His wife, Melek, never believed in her husband's guilt, convinced that he had implicated himself while pursuing a noble cause. Story 2. 19-year-old student Lizzie Marriott vanished on October 9, 2012. After her classes, she went home and left a note on the table. It was addressed to Tony and Becky Hanna, the uncle and aunt of the girl, where she was staying. In it, Lizzie said she was going to visit a friend and would be back no later than midnight. However, neither on that day nor the next did the niece return. Later, her car was found in the campus parking lot. The girl seemed to have disappeared without a trace. After some time, the search for the missing girl turned into a search for her body. The police became aware of the gruesome details of her death. Once, the girl's openness and friendliness turned against her. This is a story about the danger posed by uncontrolled desires. Horrible crimes are committed when not only state, but also universal laws are violated. The freedom of one person ends where the rights of another begin. This is an undeniable truth. For Tony and Becky, their niece became a full-fledged family member. To save on housing, she moved in with them during her studies at the University of New Hampshire. Lizzie loved marine animals very much, so she chose a future profession in marine biology. She moved to Chester in the fall of 2012, leaving her parents Bob and Melissa Marriott, with whom she lived in Massachusetts. They were separated by a 2-hour drive, but they still maintained close communication. The girl had a gentle character, was kind and sweet, which made everyone love her. She would shout, "I'm home," her aunt recalled, and we felt joy in our hearts because she felt comfortable with us, and we with her. Lizzie liked her new life, and unprecedented horizons lay ahead. In her spare time, she worked at Target, where she quickly adapted and was well regarded. There, she met 18-year-old Kate McDonald. The girls quickly found a common language, often hanging out after work. Once Lizzie was already at Kate's apartment, so when she invited her again, she agreed. On October 9th, the friends met. They wanted to spend the evening together, have dinner and watch a movie. However, their solitude was interrupted. 30-year-old Seth Mazzella, Kate's boyfriend, joined them. The heroine didn't mind the company. It's more fun together. Moreover, her new acquaintances were interesting personalities, involved in theater, and Seth graduated from the same university as Lizzie, but in theater arts. Despite the fact that the guy worked as a consultant in an electronics store, he had a rich experience. He trained as an emergency medical technician, earned a black belt in karate, and even taught martial arts. In general, they had a lot to talk about. The evening promised to be interesting and end on a good note. It's just that, entering the young people's apartment, the girl never came out again. After Lizzie didn't return by the promised time, her relatives decided to wait until the evening of the next day. Perhaps she stayed overnight at a friend's and went from there to the university. However, when she didn't show up and on October 10th, the aunt and uncle got worried and contacted her parents. Turned out they also had no information. After the unpleasant news, the mother and father got in the car and headed to Chester. On the way, they reported their daughter's disappearance. Not only the police and relatives, but also the girl's friends joined the search. The investigation began with questioning everyone who knew her. Unfortunately, the relatives didn't know where Lizzie had gone. However, thanks to her friends, this information was established. Nate McNill, a friend, said he knew where she might be and pointed to Kate McDonald. He also said he asked Kate if she had Lizzie and she said no. Detectives took note of the guy's words and started checking the new information. Meanwhile, it was found that there were no movements in the girl's bank accounts, and her phone was turned off. The initial version that she might have been in an accident was ruled out. Just a few days later, her car was found. At the same time, Bob and Melissa Marriott announced a $10,000 reward for anyone who could provide information about their daughter's whereabouts. After talking to Lizzie's friends and colleagues, investigators learned interesting information about Kate and her boyfriend. The couple was far from what they tried to appear in public. Soon after, Seth Mazzella was arrested. Lizzie and Kate's acquaintances said that recently the girls had been spending a lot of time together. However, they seemed different in character and attitude toward life. Lizzie was very sociable and compassionate, while Kate, on the contrary, was reserved and rude. What brought them closer was unclear. Those who had been working at the store for years said that this was not always the case with McDonald. After she started a relationship with Seth, she changed a lot. There was no trace of her former cheerfulness and lightness. As it turned out later, she even limited communication with her relatives, since they were against her new boyfriend. There was something suspicious about him, antisocial. The couple started dating when the girl was 17. After she turned 18, they moved in together and began living in Mazzella's apartment in Dover, New Hampshire. Paying special attention to the couple, the police checked their databases, but found nothing remarkable. Studying the profiles of young people on the internet, officers learned some details about their personal lives. Seth and Kate practiced not quite traditional relationships. On one of the websites, McDonald, under the pseudonym Miss Scarlet Vampire Actress, posted a spicy ad. She wrote that she and her lord were looking for a live-in slave. The required duties were house cleaning, dishwashing, laundry, cooking, and readiness for intimacy at any time. The girl also shared a bit about herself and her partner. She described their relationship as dominant-submissive, where the former dictates and controls and the latter completely submits to his will. At the end, the girl attached her photos in a Gothic style. From the text, it was clear that the feelings of the two were not based on love and respect, but rather on humiliation and obedience. The couple practiced BDSM, where Seth was the dominant and Kate was the submissive. Now detectives had no doubts that they could be involved in Lizzie's disappearance. On October 12th, the young people were summoned for questioning. They were questioned simultaneously but separately from each other. This played into the hands of the investigation. For 2 hours, Kate insisted that she hadn't met Lizzie on October 9th. After that, she refused to talk altogether. Meanwhile, Seth was more talkative. He denied his friend's words and said that on that day Marriott was indeed at their place. However, a tragedy occurred. First, everything was fine. They watched a movie, played strip poker. After that, they engaged in a threesome. According to him, no one objected to intimacy and was morally prepared. During the process, he tied the girls with ropes, but at some point, something went wrong, and Lizzie accidentally died. Then, in a state of shock and fear of being misunderstood, he and Kate took the girl's body to Pierce Island and threw it into the Piscataqua River. After that, they went home. After an 11-hour interrogation, Mazzella went with the police to the designated place, where he vividly demonstrated how he got there and threw the body off the cliff. On October 13th, the guy was charged with murder. The news of their daughter's death was devastating for her parents. Melissa Marriott said she had a feeling about it, but she didn't want to believe it until the last moment. On the same day, a candlelight vigil was held in memory of the departed. Her father thanked those who came and said that the prayer spoken today would help Lizzie find peace. "She has become an angel who flew to heaven," said Bob Marriott. Her friend Nate, who actively participated in the search for the girl, remembered that she always told funny stories, so she could lift spirits or comfort in difficult times. "Perhaps she would have found something to say to us in this case, too," he sadly said. The girl's parents refused to accept the version of death told by Mazzella. They explained that their daughter was in a relationship and cherished it very much. According to them, she would never betray her beloved Brittany. They prayed to God and asked the police to find the poor girl's body as soon as possible, to say goodbye to her like humans and bury her. The search went on every day. Volunteers joined the efforts of the authorities. Even a private detective was working on it. However, the river, which became Lizzie's final resting place, is subject to strong tides and ebbs. It is quite possible that she has long been carried into the Atlantic Ocean. The investigation continued, A search took place in Mazella's apartment and beyond. It is worth noting that the young couple's house was not clean and orderly. Chaos reigned everywhere. Detectives also found out that Seth was interested in occultism and black magic. Since no evidence was found in the apartment, forensic experts examined the surrounding area. In one of the trash containers, they found a bag of belongings. Among them were black leather gloves, a sweatshirt, and men's underwear. During the examination, it was established that the underwear had DNA traces belonging to Seth and Lizzie. This confirmed the intimate nature of their relationship, and the sweatshirt belonged to the deceased and was identified by her family. But what were leather gloves doing on this list? If it's a love game accessory, why get rid of it like the rest of the evidence? Apparently, not everything in Mazella's words was true. He could easily pass off the desired as reality. However, what Kat McDonald said confirmed it. The girl broke her silence, and on October 17th, she told what happened. She admitted that on October 9th, Lizzie came to her. Later, Seth joined them. At first, the three of them watched a movie, then played strip poker. In the process of the game, they got excited and decided to have intimate relationship. According to her, everyone's desire was mutual. It all started with kisses and tenderness. Then Seth suggested tying Lizzie up with ropes, and she agreed. The girl even showed schematically how Seth did it. Everything was going well, but suddenly Marriott had a seizure. She began to suffocate, and moments later, she lost consciousness. When Seth and Kat lifted the girl, she wasn't breathing. Everything happened quickly and unexpectedly. McDonald claimed that no one was to blame for what happened. It was an accident. However, a significant role in the investigation was played by the testimony of an unexpected witness. One day, a young woman went to the police station. She said she had important information about Lizzie Marriott's case and asked to speak to the detectives leading the investigation. During the conversation, she introduced herself as Catherine Fish, Seth Mazella's ex-girlfriend. From the conversation, it became clear what she was hinting at. Seth was capable of murder. Once he confessed to her that in one of his fantasies, he takes someone's life. But let's start from the beginning. Catherine and Seth met about 10 years ago. At first, he seemed attentive and caring. He courted her beautifully, didn't skimp on flowers and gifts. He was very charming in conversation. The girl quickly fell in love with the affable young man. But at the moment of their first intimacy, she learned that he was into BDSM. At first, she didn't mind new sensations, as long as he kept himself under control. However, later, Seth began to show excessive cruelty and dominance. He didn't want to be contradicted or stopped. Sometimes, he shared his thoughts and fantasies with her. During one such conversation, Catherine heard a terrible confession. Then she realized he could be dangerous. As if to confirm this, he grabbed her by the throat very tightly once. The girl begged him to let go, but he wouldn't stop and continued to squeeze harder. This incident finally shattered her illusions. Since they moved to another city, the girl didn't know where to go to get away from him. She didn't know anyone and didn't communicate with anyone. Besides, she was financially dependent on her boyfriend, so she continued to live with him, waiting for a convenient moment to escape. Catherine admitted that over time, Seth started talking about a third partner. He got bored with her in bed, so he decided to spice things up. Therefore, he periodically brought different girls to their house. But none of them stayed long, so Mazzella said they needed to find a girlfriend. Catherine's life turned into hell. Catherine admitted that Seth had frightened her so much that she didn't dare to escape. After a few months, gathering courage, she finally decided to run away. Fish miraculously overcame the distance of 1,000 miles to get to her parents' house. But that's another story. She never saw her ex-boyfriend again. In May 2014, Seth Mazzella appeared in court. The prosecution believed that the defendant was guilty not only of intentional murder but also of taking advantage. Several people testified against him. Shortly before the trial, among them was Kat McDonald. 2 months after Lizzie's death, she too was arrested and was in custody. She was charged with obstruction of justice and investigation. The girl had plenty of time to analyze what had happened and understand whom she was covering for. Initially, while behind bars, she and Seth were actively corresponding. The lovers dreamed of escaping and going to another country where there were no extradition laws. They wanted to get married and have children. However, their escape plan suffered a setback. In the winter of 2012, Seth persuaded his cellmate Ryan Bachman, who was soon to be released. Mazzella gave him access to his bank account. Bachman was supposed to withdraw money, buy drugs with it, and sell them, thereby increasing the initial capital. With this amount, they planned to buy weapons, 2 cars, explosives, and a boat. However, the friend decided to use the money for his own purposes. Moreover, authorities learned about the plan. After that, Seth abandoned the escape plan and sent Kat a letter suggesting they meet in the afterlife. He sincerely believed that death was not the end of life. Perhaps, in this way, he hinted to the girl about ending her life. In any case, time helped MacDonald. Her thoughts cleared up. Therefore, when in 2014, the prosecutor's office offered her a favorable deal, she agreed without hesitation. According to it, the suspect had to tell the truth about what happened in the apartment on the evening of October 9th. In return, the threatened 20-year prison sentence was reduced to 3. A fairly advantageous offer, considering the circumstances that became known to the investigation afterward. The girl admitted that she was very afraid of Seth and obeyed him in everything. He gradually suppressed her will, deprived her of independence. A month and a half before the tragedy, the guy sent her a message ordering her to find a third partner as soon as possible, because he didn't want to be alone while Kat was away. The thing is, the girl had 10-day theater tours scheduled. However, MacDonald never found a replacement for herself. Over time, the tone of Mazzella's messages changed. From orders, he moved on to threats, and promised a terrible retribution if she didn't do what he wanted. At the very least, Kat had to bring one of her friends, with whom he could carry out his plan. To fulfill the order, Kat invited Lizzie over. She agreed easily because she had been a guest at her place once and trusted her. And to ensure that the girl came without hesitation, MacDonald kept silent about the fact that they wouldn't be alone. Seth liked the presumed partner. He had seen her photos before, so he eagerly awaited the appointed hour. Imagine the disappointment and anger the guy felt when the evening didn't go as planned. On October 9th at 9 p.m., Marriott arrived at Mazzella's apartment. At first, Kat and Lizzie spent time together, chatting. Then Seth joined them. He was cheerful, joked a lot, and took care of the girls. In general, he brightened up the evening. After that, the young people started watching a movie. During the viewing, Seth suggested playing strip poker, dimming the lights in the room. He wanted to create a conducive atmosphere for intimacy. The game was casual, but Lizzie was losing, so she ended up in her underwear. In another losing hand, Seth suggested kissing Kat. But the girl refused, explaining that she was already in a relationship and it repulsed her. After a while, the heated guy suggested Marriott to be alone, to which she categorically replied no. In response to her reaction, Seth went to his room, where he put on black leather gloves and took out a rope. After that, he returned and sat behind Lizzie. When Seth slipped the weapon over her neck, the unsuspecting girl didn't even have time to scream. He strangled the girl without blinking an eye. Then the murderer carried out his plan and violated the body of the deceased. All this time, his girlfriend sat nearby and silently watched. Kat explained that she was very scared. She was afraid of becoming the next victim, so she did nothing to help the poor girl. Around 1 a.m, the couple wrapped Lizzie's body in tarpaulin and put it in a suitcase, which they carried to Lizzie's car. Then they headed to Pierce Island by the river there, where they lifted the suitcase onto an observation deck, pulled out the dead Marriott, and threw her off the cliff. Then they cleaned up in the car together, drove to campus, and left the girl's car in the parking lot. The couple walked 10 miles home. Kat explained that she was scared by what was happening and was in a state of shock. And later, she didn't want to testify against the guy because she knew he wouldn't have any trouble getting rid of her. During the trial, the girl kept sobbing constantly, but not a single tear fell from her eyes. Because of this, many in the courtroom doubted her sincerity. She was a good actress and could easily pretend to be miserable. This caught the attention of Seth's lawyer. He claimed that the girl could professionally transform into any role. The defendant's defense insisted that Lizzie died accidentally during intimacy. At the same time, no one denied that Seth and Kat got rid of her by disposing of the body. MacDonald's defense, on the other hand, argued that Kat had been under pressure for a long time, which had shaken the girl's mental state. The guy essentially limited her communication with family and friends, constantly controlling and coercing her into intimacy. The prosecution focused on deliberate murder, emphasizing the gloves. According to the prosecutor, Mazzella knew what he was going to do with Lizzie, so he deliberately put them on. He did it to protect himself and hide the traces. Considering all the circumstances, his action was by no means accidental. Witnesses for the prosecution also included Roberta Gherkin and Paul Hickok, acquaintances of the couple. It turns out that at 10:49 p.m., after Marriott's murder, Seth called them. He said he needed help and asked them to come over. After 11 o'clock p.m., they appeared at Mazzella's apartment and saw a strange scene. Seth was sitting on the bed and a girl in lingerie lay next to him. When Paul asked what was going on, Seth replied, "This time things went too far." He repeated this phrase over and over again. Roberta found Kat on the kitchen floor. The girl was sitting in the fetal position and rocking back and forth. The arriving couple immediately said to call an ambulance and quickly left. They didn't interfere and didn't call the police because they didn't want any extra trouble. On August 14, 2014, Seth Mazzella was found guilty of first-degree murder by strangulation, taking advantage in criminal conspiracy. The 32-year-old man was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. 20-year-old Kat MacDonald received the promised 3 years of imprisonment. It is known that in 2016 the girl was released. She does not maintain any social networks, at least not under her own name. Some believe she returned to her parents. Lizzie Marriott's body was never found. The girl's parents couldn't bury their daughter, so they made a small memorial for her in the form of a bench by the lake in their hometown. Bob and Melissa Marriott believe that the sentence is too lenient for Lizzie's former friend. Although the perpetrator is punished, they cannot call it justice. The girl is dead and will never return. However, her case can serve as an example for other women. Story 3. Love Under Duress. A broken vase can never be mended, goes the famous saying, symbolizing irreversible harm or betrayal. A fragile vessel may be pieced back together, yet its cracks linger, forever altering its appearance and utility. This analogy hits close to home for survivors of intimate exploitation. Historically, our society has often tried to diminish the pain of such experiences to avoid causing discomfort to others. However, our culture and legal systems have evolved. Individuals who have suffered these indignities are now sharing their stories and receiving the support they need, propelled by dire incidents that could not be ignored. Among these is the tragic story of Antonia Barra from Chile, around which the entire national community rallied to ensure justice was served against her aggressor. The loss of the young woman became known on the evening of October 13, 2019. Her family could never have envisioned how that day would conclude. Her sister Carla, visiting their parents' home, went upstairs to say hello to Antonia, expecting a casual chat. However, finding her seemingly asleep, Carla chose not to disturb her and headed to the door. Before she could leave, she heard Antonia ask about their mother and request the light be turned off. After telling Carla she loved her, Antonia turned away. Maybe she's just tired or not in the mood, thought Carla. Little did she know, Antonia was grappling with harrowing thoughts that left her feeling there was only one way out from her profound distress. By 7 that evening, their mother, not hearing any response from Antonia's room, entered to find a harrowing scene. Her daughter was motionless, suspended above the floor. Marcella rushed to her, finding no signs of life. Overwhelmed by shock, she sought assistance from neighbors. The family friends helped take down the body and called for emergency services. Shortly afterward, Alejandro Barra addressed the media, vowing to uncover the root causes of his daughter's desperate act and to seek justice. Known for her vivacity and intelligence, it was clear that something significant had profoundly impacted Antonia. The autopsy confirmed self-strangulation as the cause of death. The case required immediate action. Not waiting for official inquiries, the parents initiated their own investigation. Private detectives meticulously pieced together the last days of Antonia's life, identifying the individual who had driven her to despair. Promptly, Alejandro and Marcela reported Martin Perdinez to the police, suspecting him of exploitation. There is little known about him. He was born and lived in Temuco, Chile, the same city as Antonia. He came from a large family, parents, a sister, and a brother. The dynamics within his family are unclear, as there is scant information available online, which is justified later. Undoubtedly, in his early youth, a young woman named Daniela Alvarez bore his child. Nonetheless, the relationship between the two did not last long. After the couple parted ways, detectives discovered that between 2015 and 2017, Antonia and Martin communicated via a social network. At that time, Antonia was a teenager. They exchanged messages and commented on each other's photos, though their interactions were confined to the digital realm. However, they eventually met in person, which unfortunately led to a tragic outcome. Antonia was born in the late 1980s into a strong and close-knit family. The Barra family home was large and spacious, suited to a family of their size. Loving parents Alejandro and Marcela raised 5 children, 4 daughters and 1 son. It was a household where care and attention were plentiful. The children were kind and well-behaved, causing no significant trouble. However, Antonia stood out among her siblings. She was unusually perceptive, responsible, and ambitious from a young age, which made her a particular source of pride for her parents. She excelled in school, got along well with her teachers, and had plans for her future. Antonia dreamed of traveling and leading a fulfilling life. After graduating high school, she got into her university of choice and began studying a highly sought-after major. As a freshman, she immersed herself in mastering the basics of her future profession and actively participated in academic and social activities, making new friends. Her friends shared her interests and aspirations. Antonia formed an especially close bond with Consuela Uribe, who was studying at the law school. The friends would often go out, shop, and attend parties together. They became very close. Thus, when Antonia broke up with her boyfriend Rodrigo, Consuela suggested she distract herself from the heartbreak. Antonia was struggling with the breakup, so she embraced her friend's idea. She wanted to clear her mind and temporarily forget the past. The friends planned a trip for Chile's Independence Day on September 18th. Their destination was the tourist town of Pucón. By sheer coincidence, it was there that Martin and Antonia's paths crossed again. Martin was planning to attend an electronic music festival. The event was to be held at a local club called Black Room, where a DJ friend of his was performing. On September 17th, around 6:30 p.m., Uribe and Barra set off for Pucón with 3 other friends, one of whom was Consuela's boyfriend. The journey went smoothly, and upon arrival, the young people stayed in different accommodations. The girls stayed in a summer house owned by the Uribe family. After 8 o'clock p.m., the friends began preparing for a party at the popular venue, Black Room. The night promised a sea of unforgettable emotions. Before leaving, Antonia exchanged messages with her father, who asked her to be careful and cautious around strangers. In response, she reassured her father, writing that prudence was her foremost trait. Law enforcement officials repeatedly interviewed Martin Perdinez, but he denied any wrongdoing regarding Antonia. He claimed their intimacy was consensual and vehemently denied any involvement in her tragic end. However, detectives had their own perspective and evidence regarding the matter. During the investigation, it was established that Martin left Temuco on September 17th, around noon, accompanied by friends. They planned to return the next day. Upon reaching their destination, the group held a party at a rented house, filled with conversation, jokes, and of course, alcohol. Meanwhile, Antonia and Consuela got ready and headed to the club. There, they ordered a table, food, and drinks. The friends enjoyed themselves, chatting and dancing extensively. Needless to say, The Black Room Club became the venue for the young people's unexpected reunion. The chance meeting delighted them, and the man and woman spent the evening together, chatting and dancing. It was clear they were fond of each other. Antonia occasionally left him to return to her friend, who was also enjoying herself, and to greet the male acquaintances with whom she had traveled. Moving from one bar to another, she didn't realize how carried away she got with the alcohol, likely due to the long drive and an empty stomach, something she usually did not allow herself to do. Around 6:45 a.m., Consuela found her friend pleasantly chatting with a mutual acquaintance, Emilio. At that point, she told Antonia it was time to leave. Antonia refused, feeling good and wanting to continue the evening. Her friend advised her to stop drinking and reconsider her decision, but Antonia was adamant and chose to stay at the club while Consuela left. This turned out to be a regrettable decision for Antonia. Emilio became an unwitting witness to the events that unfolded afterwards, which he detailed during the investigation and in court. He noted that Martin approached Antonia and started a conversation with her. He then took her by the hand and led her towards the exit. Emilio remarked that Antonia acted oddly, unsure whether she was engaging in the conversation or just confused due to the alcohol. Nevertheless, it seemed she did not mind being led away, or perhaps she was unaware of it. Emilio assumed that the man had invited her to join him, and she agreed. Nonetheless, external surveillance footage told a different story. Martin's friends recounted that they left the club in 2 cars, but there was no room for the pair in either vehicle. Therefore, they proceeded on foot. Along the way, they came across a store. Surveillance footage made it clear that the man coerced the woman into entering. She could barely stand and was unable to resist. Martin, slightly more sober, was able to somewhat control the situation. Throughout the night, they were captured on camera several times. Along the way, Pradnus was overly affectionate and tried to kiss his companion, who did not reciprocate and tried to pull away. Upon entering the rented house, none of his friends paid much attention to the woman. Only 19-year-old Barbara, who had joined recently and hadn't been drinking, noticed that the couple was intoxicated. Afterward, they went upstairs. Around 9 a.m., Consuela received a voice message from her friend. Initially, she couldn't make out what was being said. After listening more carefully, she understood a few words. Antonia was pleading to be picked up. Since her friend didn't know her exact location, she used GPS to find it. Consuela, accompanied by her boyfriend Jose, went to the designated location. Upon entering the house, they were met by a naked Martin, who was covering himself with a pillow. When Consuela asked him where her friend was, he claimed he didn't know. They found Barbara in one of the upstairs rooms, lying on a bed in her underwear, quietly crying. Jose picked her up and carried her to the car. Consuela asked what had happened, but Antonia could only cry. The young couple tried to console her, hugging and attempting to engage her in conversation. Back at the summer house, Antonia confessed everything. Martin had exploited her against her will, and she felt powerless to stop it. Her memories were hazy. She couldn't recall much, but one thing was clear. He had wronged her. This occurred when they went upstairs. Afterwards, he left her alone and disappeared. Upon hearing about the incident, Jose and Consuela insisted that Antonia report the scoundrel to the police and seek justice. However, she refused, fearing that her parents and the public would find out. She chose to quietly endure the trauma and try to recover on her own. She asked them to tell no one about the incident. During this heartfelt conversation, Antonia received a message from her father, asking how she was doing and joking about whether she had been drinking too much. To avoid arousing suspicion, she tried to respond in her usual manner, thereby inadvertently highlighting her own intentions. The next day, Antonia met with Martin to talk. However, he was dismissive and arrogant. He insisted that the events of the previous night had been consensual. At that point, Antonia realized that she would not hear the truth or receive an apology. She knew she had to try to move on. Later, psychotherapists invited to the court hearing will explain that at the time, Antonia was experiencing intimacy trauma syndrome. It's characterized by disruptions in physical, emotional, cognitive, and interpersonal behavior. This condition can appear immediately following the incident or even months and sometimes years later. The poor girl was suffering through an acute stage alone. She could not rid herself of distressing sensations, distraction, anxiety, confusion, alternating with hysterics and crying. She undoubtedly felt a compulsive desire to cleanse herself, experiencing bouts of nausea or even vomiting. For 3 weeks, Bara kept silent and tried to behave as usual. A childhood friend confessed that she noticed nothing unusual about her. However, her classmates could not overlook the memory impairments and disorganization associated with the syndrome. One of them remarked on her declining academic performance, which was very uncharacteristic of the once disciplined student. When asked what was the cause, Antonia cited poor health. It should be noted that a large number of witnesses came to the girl's defense during the trial: friends, acquaintances, and classmates. But what was the turning point in making a fateful decision? Perhaps Antonia would have remained alive, sought professional help over time, had it not been for a series of events. Somehow, her terrible secret became known to an ex-boyfriend. However, the information reached him in a very unflattering form, which he hurried to report. The girl replied that she was not at fault for what had happened. The information he had was a gross exaggeration. Then Rodrigo did not believe her. Moreover, the day before the incident, Martin called. It is unclear what the conversation between them entailed, possibly threats from his side. One thing is clear: the next day the girl was gone. A few hours before her death, she sent a farewell message to her boyfriend, and in a family chat, she shared a childhood video. In it, Antonia was dancing and laughing joyfully, showing how much she missed her former self. She could not return to her way of life, thoughts, and actions. This tragedy made a deep impression. Thanks to Alejandro finding the strength to share his daughter's story nationwide, her tragedy resonated with the public. Antonia's name was written on posters, in social media hashtags, even on building walls. Public support had an incredible result. In less than a week, women came forward with similar claims against Perdinis. 6 new charges were filed against his name, reporting actions he took from 2010 to 2019. The man turned out to be a criminal and was taken into custody. Concurrently, Martin's family petitioned to protect their personal information, which had leaked online. The family asserted that their constitutional right to honor and respect for private life was violated, citing numerous insults, aggressive messages, and fake information online. In these actions, the Perdinis family suspected, including the Barra family. On June 12, 2020, the Temuco court granted their request. The judge required Antonia's relatives to refrain from disclosing information about the assailant's family through social media and from making compromising publications. This decision sparked outrage. Chileans were extremely upset, believing that it protected Martin. On July 21st, the Barra family filed an appeal with the Supreme Court, but it was rejected. Later that month, the suspect's lawyer submitted a petition for protective measures concerning his client. In the same month, he was officially charged with several attacks. Public outcry was gaining momentum. In Chile, the investigation became known as the Antonia case, a symbol of justice restoration for victims of violence. Many women, after many years, dared to come forward about their experiences. On July 22nd, an unexpected event occurred. The court changed the previously decided preventive measure from detention to house arrest. Martin Perdinis was effectively set free. At the same time, the judge explained that this in no way summarizes the presumed punishment. Meanwhile, the prosecutor charged Martin with 5 instances of misconduct, but the court only acknowledged 2. Massive protests swept across the country. Thousands of people took to the streets, outraged by the cessation of investigations regarding certain facts and the decision on house arrest. The authorities supported the citizens by sending a request to the appeals court. The judiciary responded immediately. It revoked the selected preventive measure and took Martin into custody. The same court later eliminated the statute of limitations for 2 cases of intimate violence. Concurrently, Alejandro, along with feminist organizations, worked on drafting a bill that would establish punishments for such crimes. He emphasized that no one should remain indifferent when a woman is led away by a man without resisting, especially while intoxicated. Barra stressed the importance of taking necessary measures in such cases. As this state makes a woman a potential victim, the investigation continued. In February 2021, Martin's phone was found. Forensic analysis revealed it contained photos in which the accused displayed women's underwear. He was clearly proud of his conquests and apparently kept account. The police report ran nearly 400 pages, including statements from victims and witnesses, people close to both Martin and Antonia, and those who had known them since childhood. The accused childhood teacher recounted that was a smart and cheerful child, but was very interested in topics related to intimacy. Some women recalled that when they were little, he touched them. At the time, however, no one thought much of it, as they were all children. On June 14, 2022, the criminal court in Temuco commenced its hearings, which were expected to last over a month. During this period, the prosecution presented a series of evidence, expert testimonies, and witness statements. The disclosed video footage clearly showed that Antonia was unable to control the situation. On August 26th, Martin was sentenced to 20 years of imprisonment for crimes against intimacy and acts of intimacy-related aggression. On December 29th, the Supreme Court accepted the defense's appeal, disagreeing with the verdict. A new trial was scheduled for spring 2023. Meanwhile, the efforts of the Barra family had an effect. The drafting of Antonia's law began, enhancing existing legislation to ensure that anyone committing an act of violence that pushed the victim to end their own life would be inevitably punished with imprisonment. On March 16th, the defendant's legal team resigned, and his case was taken over by public defense. Finally, on April 24, 2024, the second trial commenced for 5 cases of violence and 2 cases of forcible intimacy. During this time, Perdinas waived his right to remain silent and explained the events. He claimed that his crimes were committed under severe alcohol intoxication, to which the prosecutor responded that by drinking with the women, he made the victims vulnerable. On July 7, 2023, the man was found guilty. The federal prosecution demanded a sentence of 41 years in prison. On July 28, 2023, 31-year-old Martin Perdinas was sentenced to 17 years in prison for 7 intimacy-related offenses committed against 6 victims. Considering the time already spent in custody, he would serve 14 years. The tragedy that befell Antonia Barra helped expose a dangerous offender. It's unknown how many more innocent women might have suffered from his actions. The line between harassment and flirtation is very thin. One can never be prepared for someone deciding to cross that perilous line. However, the societal changes that have occurred have altered the perception of victims of violence. Now everyone understands the risks of uncontrolled desires and the inability to control oneself. Ultimately, the body and soul of another person are as fragile as a crystal vase, thus precious and inviolable. Story 4. The Forbidden Fruit. Why do people commit crimes? Human nature is complex and multifaceted, and every action has its reason. This time, we will not discuss people with mental health issues and their tendencies towards violence. We will also exclude military personnel, individuals whose job is directly connected with eliminating enemies. It seems that the primary motives for life-threatening acts are material gain, revenge, exceeding the limits of necessary defense, and accidental incidents. Most crimes occurred domestically during conflicts and disputes when it seemed like everything was fine. However, these acts of violence are not a cause, but a consequence of human spirit degradation, leaving a permanent mark. Michael Redlick, on the morning of January 12, 2019, it was reported that 65-year-old Michael Redlick had passed away. Known in his circles, the former NBA executive with the Memphis Grizzlies and a beloved professor at the University of Central Florida died from a heart attack initially. However, upon the arrival of emergency services, it became clear that Mr. Redlick died from a stab wound to the chest. Various theories were considered, including self-inflicted harm. Later, forensic experts determined that the incident was a criminal act of taking a life. Some time later, the perpetrator was identified. The person who helped Michael meet his end was his beloved wife. By June 2022, she stood trial, yet this story is not straightforward. She did not admit guilt for the intentional crime and frequently changed her testimony. The legal battle between the prosecution and defense was long and heated. Ultimately, the court's verdict was unexpected for everyone. What really happened in the Winter Park suburb of Florida, USA? Who is the true victim, and could the tragedy have been prevented? Let's explore together. Sitting in the defendant's chair is 46-year-old Danielle Redlick. The accused is of short stature and slim build. Her chestnut hair has visibly grayed, either because she had no opportunity to visit a hairdresser, having spent about 3 years in custody, or perhaps the gray is a testament to her true turmoil and stress. Until 2019, she was just an ordinary working American woman, a mother of 2 wonderful children. A specialist in multimedia communications, she was not particularly well known. However, after the crime against her husband, her name was frequently highlighted in the media. This is what happens when the dirty laundry of seemingly respectable spouses is aired publicly. Danielle was born in 1976 in Florida. After some time, her family moved to Cleveland, Ohio. Her childhood was typical in many ways. She grew up kind and well-mannered, with a creative nature. Danielle was the eldest child in her family. As she matured, her appreciation for beauty intensified. She enrolled at Valencia College, where she earned an Associate of Arts degree. Later, she was admitted to the psychology department at Baldwin Wallace University. In 1996, Danielle's mother, Caitlin Aquino, remarried. However, the marriage was short-lived, lasting only 2 years, after which Caitlin passed away from cancer. It turns out that she had been battling breast cancer for a long time. Thanks to her husband's comprehensive insurance, she received high-quality medical care, which was the primary reason for legally formalizing their marriage. Unfortunately, the treatment ultimately did not yield the desired result. After his wife's death, the man became not only a widower, but also a true father to her children. Since it was difficult for him to raise them alone, he asked for help from Caitlin, the eldest daughter. At that time, 22-year-old Danielle was living independently, but responded to the request. Thus, after Caitlin's death, Danielle, her brother and sister, and their stepfather, Michael Redlick, all ended up under one roof. Yes, you heard right. The very same Michael, who later became Danielle's husband and was perpetrated on a winter evening in 2019. At first, their relationship was built on friendship. Danielle took care of the younger kids and worked part-time at a bar at night. Michael was building his career in professional sports, involved in player recruitment. He grew very attached to the children, who became like his own. He also felt comfortable with Danielle. Over time, she saw him as a dependable support. Despite the 20-year age difference, their interaction was easy and natural. Gradually, the man and woman grew closer. Neither age nor status bothered them. However, Danielle initially didn't want to make their relationship public to her family and kept it hidden for a while. With his new partner, Michael felt younger and more energetic, and she felt loved and protected. Since he had good connections, he easily found her a new job in an advertising agency. Besides, he had a high income and devoted all his free time to the family. Overall, things were going well for both of them. After some time, Mr. Redlick received a tempting job offer. He was invited to become the vice president of corporate sales for the Memphis Grizzlies basketball club. However, the new job required moving to another state. Without hesitation, he asked Danielle to come with him. But she hesitated. Danielle didn't want to change her familiar lifestyle, and she was still studying, so she declined. Yet their relationship continued long distance, and the lovers often saw each other. One day, he showed her the house he had bought for them, impressing her. The cottage was located in a picturesque area by the Mississippi River. The neighborhood was quiet and cozy. Ultimately, Danielle decided to move and live together. To ensure she had no doubts, he found her an interesting job in the radio industry. Later, Danielle recalled that, at first, everything was perfect. It was only Michael's job that later brought changes. Many years later, during the trial against Danielle, her 15-year-old daughter Jaden testified. She spoke of how Michael was an excellent father who did a lot for his family. Along with her 8-year-old brother Sawyer, they attended one of the best schools, hoping to pursue careers in sports thanks to their dad's encouragement and support in enrolling them in sports programs. Jaden was close to her father, which she couldn't say about her mother, whom she saw as hysterical, manipulative, and toxic at times. The young lady believed that Danielle instigated all the conflicts at home while Michael tried to keep the family in peace intact. But was it really as the elder daughter perceived? And what caused discord in what seemed like a happy and united family? Mr. Redlick's new position came with increased responsibility and stress, and he had a difficult relationship with the management. This took a toll on him. He became very stressed and tired. Eventually, to relax and unwind, Michael turned to alcoholic beverages. Over time, this became a daily occurrence. He would often stay out late, returning home intoxicated and angry. The tension in the house was palpable. Danielle tried to support her husband, understanding his condition. After talking to her, it seemed he would calm down and promise to stop. But his promises were short-lived. One time, Michael missed a dinner they had planned together, which was not the first occurrence. But this time, they had specifically arranged to spend the evening together. Danielle was very upset and stated that if he couldn't make time for her, he should have warned her so she could make other plans. Heading towards the door, she made an ill-timed joke, which struck a nerve with Michael. He stood in the doorway and hit her across the face. The slap was so forceful that she staggered back. She then noticed that her clothes and the floor were splattered with blood. In shock, she recoiled from her husband, who began crying and apologizing. Clearly distressed, Michael tried to make amends immediately. He took his wife to a familiar sports doctor and explained what had happened. The doctor examined the unfortunate victim and provided first aid, then recommended seeing a dentist and a plastic surgeon, as the injuries were quite severe. Danielle even had a front tooth chipped. The next day, Michael arranged a memorable dinner, was very attentive and caring. Undoubtedly, his wife forgave him and did not report the incident anywhere. There was a fairly strict domestic violence law in the state, so Mrs. Redlick felt sympathy for her husband and decided not to cause him any further trouble. In fact, this was not the first warning sign. Danielle had already encountered similar behavior before. The incident happened while they were living together in Cleveland. At a concert, Danielle chatted with an ex-boyfriend, which made Michael jealous. On their way home, he dropped a few sarcastic comments about it. Danielle responded in kind. Unexpectedly, he hit her, then immediately apologized, noting that he did it because she hurt his feelings. Danielle forgave her partner, blaming herself as well. Over time, the incident was forgotten. After all, things happen in relationships. In 2003, the Redlicks welcomed their first child, a daughter named Jaden. A year later, the couple decided to legalize their relationship. It was a bright period in their lives. Everything was going well. However, Michael still faced challenges at work. The management changed, and he couldn't get the promotion he had hoped for. 7 years later, the family grew with the addition of a son named Sawyer. The parents were fully engaged in raising their children. If it weren't for one but Michael's job, the tension escalated, and he began drinking again. This led to more frequent conflicts. During one argument, he grabbed Danielle by the throat and pinned her against the wall, which terrified her. This time, his wife couldn't tolerate the rough behavior. She packed up, took the children, and moved in with her relatives. It's worth noting, they did not approve of the marriage initially, but eventually came to terms with it. Michael repeatedly visited her, apologizing and asking her to come back home. After some time, their relationship was restored. The following years were unstable. The Redlicks moved several times. The family patriarch was offered a job in California, where they lived for about 5 years. This period could hardly be called successful. The man again struggled with his issues and continued to indulge in drinking. There came a time when both spouses were unemployed and lived off their savings. In 2014, another move was on the horizon, this time to Indiana. However, the prospects were promising. To find a new home and settle matters, the man went ahead first. Danielle stayed in California with the children, They needed time to sell their old property and belongings. The constant moving had also become exhausting. It was difficult for the children to adapt to the rapidly changing environments. The whole process took a year. During this time, the family's financial situation improved. However, the marital relationship underwent changes. The distance and infrequent meetings affected them. Danielle and Michael grew distant and barely communicated. When the spouses finally reunited, they faced new issues. At one point, Danielle began to suspect her husband of infidelity. He became unusually cold and distant, and the former passion had faded. However, Michael found the strength to confess that his age and health were to blame. He had been embarrassed to mention this earlier, fearing he would lose his younger wife. But Danielle was grateful for his honesty and supported him as before. After trying numerous medications, the couple decided to undergo a course of hormone injections. Testosterone injections helped Michael rejuvenate physically and mentally. He seemed to become younger, regaining his former energy and vigor. With this came an increase in his aggressiveness. One evening, while watching a movie together, Michael fell asleep. Danielle went upstairs to rest. The next morning, he entered the bathroom while she was brushing her teeth and struck her on the head. He justified his action by saying she had not woken him up the evening before. She responded that she was tired of this and was leaving. This only angered him further, and he began to choke her. Poor Danielle could not defend herself and began to lose consciousness. At one moment, she felt like she was dying. After some time, Mrs. Redlick opened her eyes and saw her husband standing over her, scared and confused, begging for forgiveness. All Danielle could do was silently crawl away. After this incident, they continued to live in the same house and raise their children together. But from that time, their relationship fundamentally changed. Apparently, a point of no return had been reached. The man began to drink more frequently, and conflicts in the home increased, even over trivial matters. The number of times Michael's discontent escalated into physical aggression increased. However, the woman did not leave him. Despite her dissatisfaction with the situation and resentment towards her husband, she continued to love him deeply. The ongoing situation also affected Danielle. She became nervous and irritable, withdrew into herself. To distract herself, she took up photography. Nevertheless, their family still appeared respectable, as most of their disagreements did not extend beyond the home. By the end of 2014, the Redlicks finally settled in Florida. This time, Michael decided to change his career path, tired of the constant stress. He took a position as Director of External Affairs and Partnership Programs at the University of Central Florida and began teaching. Although his income was less than what he made in the NBA, the job brought him enjoyment and stability. Initially, the family rented a home, but after a year, they purchased their own property in the quaint area of Winter Park. Their family home was impressive. The house was designed in a Mediterranean style and had huge square footage. Danielle favored the attic floor, which served as her retreat. She often spent nights there, especially when Michael had bouts of anger. Testosterone injections rejuvenated him and restored their intimate life, but even during intimate moments, he could be harsh. Their relationship remained tense and unstable. Against this backdrop, Danielle developed an alcohol dependency. While Michael worked and supported the family, Danielle managed the household and children, increasingly withdrawing into herself. The numerous disputes eventually led to the couple separating in 2016. Despite this, Michael continued to see the children and support them financially, paying the bills. By this time, Danielle had found a job at a school. New acquaintances helped her out of her depression, and her responsibilities restored her independence. However, she still continued to see Michael. He could come and go as he pleased. During one of these days, another argument ensued, after which Danielle ended up in the hospital with a concussion. She kept silent again and did not tell the truth about what happened, fearing it would cause problems for her husband. But this time, Michael took her silence for granted. During questioning, Danielle confessed that in early October 2016, something extraordinary happened. Her husband had tried to run her over with his car. She was saved only because she managed to jump into the bushes. After this, Danielle went to the police department. However, when detectives began to inquire in detail about the incident, she changed her mind and left. The reason was the same as always. Later, the couple reconciled and moved back in together. However, this turned out to be a fateful decision for both of them. At around 9 a.m. on January 12, 2019, a 911 call was made. On the other end of the line, a woman introduced herself as Danielle Redlick and reported that her husband Michael had died from a heart attack. When the rescue service arrived at the scene and entered the house, they immediately noticed a strong smell of cleaning agent. At the entrance to the living room, the team encountered a bucket filled with pink-colored water. Beyond this, a scene from a thriller unfolded. A man lay on the floor in a pool of blood, lifeless. It was clear that the unfortunate man had not died from a heart attack as his wife had claimed, but from a penetrating knife wound. The woman who made the call was also found with cuts on her wrists. Paramedics provided first aid before taking her to the hospital. Following them, the police began their investigation. When law enforcement examined the scene, they were certain that Michael Redlick's life had been taken. It was unlikely that he could have inflicted such a fatal injury on himself. Later, forensic analysis confirmed that the blood traces in the home belonged to the deceased. The pink liquid in the bucket at the entrance was nothing but diluted blood. Someone, possibly the homeowner herself, had tried to erase a trail leading from the bedroom to the living room, indicating that the body had been dragged. Despite the cleaning efforts, not all evidence was destroyed. Blood spatter was found in the corners of the room and on the walls. Moreover, a large knife lay at the entrance to the kitchen, and 3 smaller knives were found in the sink. Detectives were eager to speak with Danielle. Therefore, once doctors reported that her injuries were not life-threatening, she was questioned. During the interview, she repeatedly changed her statements. Initially, she claimed to have thought her husband died of heart disease. Later, she stated that he had taken his own life following an argument. However, experts refuted her claims. Such a wound is difficult to self-inflict, and individuals intending to end their life usually choose a simpler and less painful method. The autopsy showed that Michael died from blood loss. With timely medical help, his life could have been saved. Additionally, he had a lacerated left eye. Toxicological tests also revealed a high level of alcohol in his system. The investigation revealed that a few days before the incident, there was an argument between the spouses, witnessed by their elder daughter. Michael had been drinking and burst into the bathroom where Danielle was hiding. However, their daughter Jaden intervened, taking the bottle away from him. After this, Danielle left the house and returned once her husband had fallen asleep. According to the girl, it was the first time she had seen such a burst of anger in her father, for which he later apologized multiple times. She still maintained that he was a loving and caring father, while asserting that her mother was the instigator of conflicts. The next day, the couple reconciled. Michael invited his wife and children to a soccer game. However, according to witnesses, Danielle appeared upset and was virtually non-communicative. That evening, the parents dropped their kids off at a friend's house for a sleepover and left alone. Later, Danielle stopped by McDonald's and returned home around 10:30 p.m. Upon entering the house, she found her husband drunk. During dinner, Danielle received a message from an unknown man. Michael saw it, bit off a piece of his hamburger and spit it at his wife. He then attacked her, attempting to strangle her. In self-defense, Danielle grabbed the first thing she could, a knife, and stabbed him in the chest. He fell and began to bleed profusely. According to the defendant, she immediately called emergency services, but mistakenly dialed the wrong number. Her actions were later corroborated during the investigation. In a state of shock, she lay down next to Michael and fell asleep until morning. At least, that's how Danielle explained the 11 hours of inactivity. When asked by the prosecution why she lied during the emergency call and subsequent questioning, Mrs. Redlick explained that she was afraid. She was concerned that no one would believe she had acted in self-defense. There were reasons for this fear. Shortly before the incident, she had been involved in a scuffle with friends. When police arrived at the scene, She resisted, attempting to bite one of them. She also refused to cooperate with the investigation, leading to charges of disorderly conduct and resisting arrest. Danielle had been on probation for about a year. It was also established that the cuts on her wrists were self-inflicted. She claimed she had tried to end her life due to the emotional turmoil, but the nature of the injuries suggested otherwise. They were superficial and not life-threatening. Therefore, her claims were not believed. Investigators also discovered that Danielle was far from a role model. After learning of Michael's infidelities, she signed up on a dating site, where she interacted with men and retaliated by being unfaithful. Her profile status declared that she was single and not in a relationship. Analysis of countless messages between Michael and Danielle showed that she still loved her husband. Once she learned of his affairs, she felt betrayed and disillusioned. She also found out that Michael planned to leave her, despite appearing repentant and desiring to mend their relationship. Danielle explained that it was hard for her to understand and accept her husband's actions. She was heartbroken that she had dedicated the best years of her life to a man who did not appreciate her. The prosecution used this information against her. The prosecutor argued that the crime was premeditated in a fit of rage because she could not forgive his infidelity and the impending divorce. Like Mr. Redlick, she was also prone to fits of anger, confirmed by their neighbors who noted that the couple often argued, loudly escalating into physical altercations. However, Michael and Danielle were described differently by those who knew them. Michael was portrayed positively as kind and helpful, while Danielle was seen as quarrelsome. Video evidence was presented showing the defendant acting irrationally and attacking her husband. Friends and Michael's brother agreed with this portrayal. One of them recalled calling her crazy, but assured that all would be well as long as steak knives were hidden. Danielle's lawyer argued that her actions were dictated by self-defense and a history of emotional and physical abuse. Relatives, often witnesses to their arguments, confirmed that Michael was rough and emotionally abusive. They also knew he frequently physically abused and humiliated her, although he never did so in their presence. Some family members reported that Danielle was nervous and quick-tempered, which only emerged after years of marriage. The prosecution clung to the fact that she effectively left her husband to die, which indicated she was waiting it out. They proved that her account logged into a dating app the night of the incident, suggesting premeditation driven by hatred and resentment, possibly even for financial gain. Following the divorce, Danielle stood to lose a portion of their accumulated wealth. At the time of Michael's death, her net worth was estimated at $1.2 million. It was also brought up that she had repeatedly changed her statements, seemingly trying to confuse the investigation and possibly tampered with evidence. However, the defense maintained that Mr. Redlick was a manipulator and predator. After his first wife's death, he pursued his stepdaughter relentlessly and molded a young woman to suit his needs. During the investigation, the prosecution offered the defendant a plea deal to admit to manslaughter, which would have resulted in only 10 years of imprisonment. However, she declined, despite the fact that if found guilty of first or second-degree murder, she faced a life sentence. She continued to insist on her innocence. The outcome of the trial was surprising to everyone. On July 17, 2022, the jury delivered their verdict. They found Danielle Redlick not guilty of premeditated murder, as they believed her actions were indeed in self-defense. However, they found her guilty of tampering with evidence, for which she received a 5-year suspended sentence. Having already served 3 years, these were credited to her. On August 5, 2022, the day the sentence was announced, the defendant was released in the courtroom. What do you think? Was the verdict fair? Or were the jurors cleverly misled into believing that Danielle's taking Michael's life was calculated and cold-blooded? Story 5. The Case of Christy Shawn and Joseph Codd. Why did a friend eliminate an entire family? Have you ever pondered how well you truly know your friends, colleagues, or neighbors, and how much you can trust these individuals? Typically, friends know everything about us, but occasionally, people who only pretend to be our friends and gain our trust might later exploit our vulnerabilities if they wish to betray or harm us. For most people, Friendship is one of those elements that bring meaning to life. Thus, supporting and assisting a friend is paramount. But sometimes the intent to help can turn into a tragedy. The tragic loss of a young woman named Christy Shawn and her husband Joseph Codd in 2015 shocked the quiet provincial town of Leicester, North Carolina. This incident was among the loudest and most brutal crimes in the history of this small community. At the time of the tragedy, the couple was joyously anticipating the addition of a new family member. However, the most horrifying aspect was that their perpetrator was someone they knew well, trusted, and considered a friend. Furthermore, they were not his only victims. Early life of Christy Shawn. Christy Maria Shawn Codd was born on September 3, 1976, in Madrid, Spain, and was the only child of American military personnel. Her father was a U.S. Air Force soldier, and due to his duties, he frequently moved from place to place with his wife and daughter following. The family did not stay long in Spain, and over the next few years they lived in various European countries before returning to the United States. The girl began her schooling in New Orleans, Louisiana, but within a year the family moved to Texas, then to Illinois, and after that, Shawn spent several years in Latin American countries. Such a nomadic lifestyle had its benefits, as Christy spoke multiple languages from an early age and had the opportunity to experience the cultures and traditions of other countries. However, during her teenage years, she faced challenges in settling into new groups and making friends in new places. Just as she would start to settle in, it was time to pack up, move, and change schools and social circles. Yet, it was precisely because of the constant changes that she developed excellent communication skills. Christy easily found common ground with various people and was known as a sweet, sociable, and charming young woman. Additionally, from an early age, she actively participated in sports, including gymnastics and swimming, and for some time she took kickboxing classes. When Christy finished school, her father retired from the military, and the family settled in Biloxi, Mississippi. There, she finally made real friends and discovered a new hobby: cooking. The teenager enjoyed preparing various dishes, experimented a lot in the kitchen, and her culinary masterpieces indeed deserved attention and praise. Eventually, she decided to pursue further development in this area and completed culinary courses. Her parents thought she would become a professional chef, but unexpectedly, she also discovered her talent for acting. Actress and culinary TV star, a beautiful and ambitious young woman, brimming with talent, enrolled in an acting academy and moved to Los Angeles. Their broad prospects opened before her, and she intelligently seized every opportunity to make her mark. Christy appeared in commercials, performed on the theater stage, and also took part in some high-profile Hollywood productions as an extra or stunt performer. Specifically, she had a minor role in the Terminator franchise, performing quite risky stunts. In 2000, the young woman graduated from the academy, but by that time, she had not landed any significant or notable roles, despite her striking appearance and evident talent. She then decided to focus on her culinary skills, and also on sports, turning these two passions into a quite profitable business. Christy participated in several popular culinary TV shows which made her well known, turning her into a popular and recognizable figure. She made it to the finals of one season of the next Food Network Star, but unfortunately, the blonde did not win, as the judges had mixed reviews of her culinary experiments. However, Shawn was not greatly dismayed, as she managed to attract considerable attention to herself. Thousands of people followed her on social media, keeping up with her life and creations. She actively promoted a healthy lifestyle, gave advice on proper nutrition, and even developed her own exercise routines to maintain good physical condition. About a year later, Christy founded and began successfully developing her own catering company, which provided banquet services for various events, and also retailed prepared culinary products. Her business was distinctive in that it focused on proper and healthy eating, and additionally, the menu featured her own original recipes, which she created and perfected. Soon, the young woman contemplated starting her own farm, which would grow healthy and environmentally friendly produce. This would help her expand her business in the catering industry. At the same time, she conducted online courses on proper nutrition and developed several other projects. Fateful encounter on TV in 2012, Christy met Joseph Timothy Codd, better known as JT, who worked as a casting director in television, responsible for selecting participants and actors for various high-rated projects. They first met at a studio in Los Angeles, at the casting for a culinary show that the young woman wanted to participate in, and they instantly clicked. Joseph was nearly 7 years older than Christy, had been married before but was in the process of divorcing at the time they met. He was utterly charmed by the beauty and charisma of this delightful blonde, and he began to court her. The young woman was not averse to his attentions, and soon they began a romantic relationship. Joseph shared and supported the ideas of his beloved, and together they began to work on the project of their own farm. Soon after, the couple decided to leave Los Angeles and moved from sunny California to North Carolina. They sold Christie's quite successful and well-established catering business. Joseph sold his house in Hollywood, and they invested all the proceeds in buying a large piece of land in the town of Leicester. The couple acquired a spacious and cozy house, as well as a nearly 1-acre plot of land to realize their dream. The man continued to collaborate with TV channels, but now worked remotely, while the woman actively worked on developing her personal blog about proper nutrition and a healthy lifestyle. They were an ideal couple, with their relationship marked by love and harmony. Soon, the lovebirds decided to formalize their relationship, and in August 2014, they had a lavish wedding attended by several hundred guests, including relatives, friends, colleagues, neighbors, and even some fans of the famous couple. They were truly happy and full of plans for their future together. 3 months after the wedding, the newlyweds learned that they were going to become parents for the first time. Their joy knew no bounds. After the new year, during a routine ultrasound examination, the doctor told the couple that they were expecting a daughter, and a few days later, during a phone call with her mother, Christy mentioned that they had decided to name their firstborn Skylar. Everything was going perfectly, and the pregnancy was progressing smoothly, but the couple's happiness was tragically short-lived. The mysterious disappearance of the Codds Christy was 5 months pregnant, and actively preparing for the arrival of their baby. She almost daily called her parents, who lived in another state, sharing updates on her well-being and chatting with her mother, sometimes for an hour at a time. However, on March 13, 2015, Christy's mother was unable to reach her daughter, but initially did not think much of it. The situation repeated the next day. Calls went through, but no one answered. Her son-in-law's phone also went unanswered. When by March 15th, both spouses' phones were turned off, Christy's mother became alarmed. Since Christy and Joseph's parents lived in other states, they couldn't quickly check on their children's home to ensure everything was all right. Therefore, Christy's mother called a close friend of her daughter, a woman named Cecily, who lived nearby and could check on them at their home. When the friend arrived at the Codd residence, she saw that both spouses' personal cars were parked at the house. However, the front door was locked, and no one responded to knocks and shouts. The couple's phones had been off for 3 days, which was also highly suspicious. Through a window, Cecily saw that the couple's beloved dogs, who they cherished and would never willingly leave alone, were locked inside one of the rooms. The woman decided to walk around the house and noticed that the back door lock had been forcefully broken, indicating that someone had attempted to enter, or had indeed entered, the home. She immediately informed Christy's mother by phone, who then promptly called the police. The responding officers confirmed that the back door had been broken into and discovered disarray inside, indicating that someone had been searching for something. According to the family, some valuables had been stolen, including a jewelry box belonging to the homeowner, and a safe in the couple's bedroom had been breached. However, there were no signs of blood, struggle, or evidence that the couple had been detained or taken by force. Additionally, the perpetrator had acted very cautiously, leaving no fingerprints or DNA traces. The relatives clung to the faint hope that 45-year-old Joseph and his 38-year-old pregnant wife Christy were still alive, but the experienced officers were not optimistic in their forecasts. Suspicious neighbor in the initial days, the investigation simply stalled. No clues or even somewhat significant evidence could be found. The missing couple had no enemies or ill-wishers, and reconstructing what had happened was challenging even in broad strokes. The spouses' phones were left at home, last used on March 12th. Only incoming calls were recorded the next day, after which the devices died. The police decided to question the couple's neighbors to see if they had noticed anything strange or suspicious recently. An interesting detail emerged. A neighbor living across the street saw another local resident throwing a large bundle into a trash bin near the Codd's home on the morning of March 15th. At the time, he didn't think much of it. But when he learned of the couple's disappearance, he thought the information might be useful to the investigation. Checking the contents of the bins was no longer possible, as the trash had been taken to the dump just the day before, and now any potential evidence would need to be searched for there. But first, the police wanted to speak with the person who had discarded the strange bundle. He turned out to be a 36-year-old Robert Jason Owens, who lived on the same street, was well acquainted with the couple, and even considered a close family friend. Robert was a handyman and had helped Christy and Joseph when they first moved into their new home. They became friends, and later the couple invited their new friend and neighbor to their own wedding. At first glance, there was nothing suspicious about this, except that other locals described Owens as a strange and unpredictable person. Horrific discovery and shocking confessions on March 16th. Robert was summoned to the police station for questioning, initially denying any involvement in the couple's disappearance and claiming ignorance about the bundle mentioned. There wasn't much to charge him with initially, beyond the unsubstantiated claims of another neighbor. However, that evening, the situation dramatically changed after the very same large, strange bundle was found at the landfill. Inside were items from the missing couple's home, including Robert's clear fingerprints and DNA traces found on partially burnt clothing belonging to the couple, a blanket and a throw from their home, all stained with blood. This evidence confirmed police suspicions that Christy and Joseph were no longer alive. Doubts were dispelled when police searched the suspect's home and found charred human skeletal remains in his wood stove. Robert was then brought in as a suspect in the brutal elimination of his neighbor and the neighbor's pregnant wife. Despite his denials and inconsistent statements, he eventually confessed after several hours, and his admissions were truly shocking. He admitted to the double fatal incident, but claimed it was accidental. According to him, on the evening of March 12th, he decided to visit his friend's home but swerved off the road to avoid hitting a dog, getting stuck in the mud. He walked to the Codd's home and asked for help to push his car out. The helpful and responsive couple agreed to assist, and while they were pushing the car, Robert, sitting at the wheel, accidentally confused the gas and brake pedals, striking and running over the couple. Terrified, he believed he would be accused of taking their lives, so he chose not to call the police or emergency services, instead deciding to cover up the incident. Robert claimed he returned to the Codd's house, broke into the back door, and took blankets from the bedroom to move the bodies, which he wasn't sure were deceased. He wrapped the bodies, placed them in the bed of his pickup, and drove them to his home, where he dismembered them in his own bathroom using a saw and a small axe. He then fired up his stove and began incrementally throwing pieces of his friends' bodies into the fire, hoping they would burn completely. The blood-soaked clothing, blankets, and footwear of the deceased, he oddly chose not to burn but instead packed into a trash bag and disposed of in a dumpster, assuming that once the trash was taken to the landfill, no one would be able to find anything. After all this, Robert claimed he decided to stage a burglary, though in reality, he had robbed his friend's home himself, stealing money and valuables, which he pawned the next day, unsolved crime. The cruelty with which Robert disposed of his friends' bodies and the eerie calmness with which he recounted the events shocked even seasoned police officers. In his home, they found a saw and an axe stained with blood, skin, and bone fragments of the deceased. The accused hadn't even bothered to clean the tools or attempt to hide them, confident that the investigation would never lead to him since he had left no traces at the Codd's house. Forensic analysis confirmed that the bone fragments found in Owen's stove belonged to the missing couple. Law enforcement decided to delve deeper into the suspect's background. Robert was unmarried, had no children, and barely maintained any contact with his relatives. He had previously lived in Asheville, North Carolina, but in 2000, he bought land in Leicester and later built a house there. It turned out that his name was linked to an unresolved crime from 15 years prior that occurred in Asheville. In 2000, Robert's close friend Zeb Wayne Quinn, who was only 18 at the time, mysteriously disappeared. Robert and Zeb had known each other since school, lived nearby, and were friends. Zeb was undergoing military training and also worked part-time at Walmart. On January 2, 2000, after finishing his shift, Quinn met with Robert, planning to drive to Leicester to buy a new car, but he never returned home. A few days later, his Mazda protege was found in another part of town, parked with its headlights on. Inside, a heart was drawn on the window with red lipstick. The car's owner was never found. The car also had damage and scratches with traces of paint from another vehicle. The last person to see Zeb was Robert, whose car also had damage, and it turned out that the scratches contained paint particles from Zeb's car. Robert told a peculiar and implausible story. Shortly after they headed towards Leicester, Zeb blinked at him to stop. Zeb said he received a message on his pager and urgently needed to use a payphone. He asked Robert to wait and drove off to the nearest gas station but returned 10 minutes later looking frantic, said their plans had changed, and then drove off in an unknown direction, hitting his friend's car in the process. It was also discovered that Zeb had a romantic relationship with a woman named Misty Taylor, whose former boyfriend, Wesley Smith, had threatened Zeb with harm if he didn't stop seeing Misty. Taylor, Smith, and Owens were questioned in this case, but due to a lack of evidence, all three were released. Additionally, Misty and Wesley had alibis, which was not the case for Robert. A significant amount of money, which Zeb had with him in case he decided to buy the car, and his pager disappeared from his car, and it was never determined what message he had received, if any. The investigation leaned towards the theory that there was no message at all. Another oddity was that the day after Zeb's disappearance, a man called Walmart claiming to be him, stating he wouldn't be coming to work for the next few days due to illness. However, the colleague who answered the call thought the voice sounded strange and unfamiliar, not like Zeb at all. That phone call was traced to a Volvo plant where Robert worked. During questioning, Owens unexpectedly claimed that he made the call at his friend's request the night before Zeb sped away. No new evidence or witnesses were found, and the case remained unsolved, with Zeb Quinn listed as missing ever since. However, 15 years after these events, Owens was interrogated again, suspected of being directly involved in his longtime friend's disappearance. New unexpected details of an old case in June 2015. The case of Zeb Quinn was reopened from the archives, and the investigation resumed. However, at first, it seemed unlikely that law enforcement would uncover any new information. Robert recounted the same story he had told back in 2000, indicating he had nothing new to add. Nevertheless, the police decided to conduct a more thorough search of his property, where they stumbled upon something very peculiar. In a detached concrete slab at Owens' home, a strangely walled-off cavity was discovered, inside which were small, heavily charred human bone fragments. Unfortunately, the remains were too damaged to undergo DNA analysis, so it was impossible to definitively determine if they belonged to the missing Quinn. A neighbor's interview provided even more unexpected results. An elderly man living nearby remembered something from January 2000, when young Owens had just purchased the land and was starting to build his house. One evening, he started a fire that emitted a sickly, sweet, nauseating smell. The neighbor even confronted him because the wind was blowing the stench in his direction, nearly making him sick. Soon after, the fire pit was covered with concrete, which seemed highly unusual, but Robert claimed he planned to build a small fountain there, which he never did. The neighbor had forgotten about the foul-smelling fire until 15 years later, when police showed up at the property. Ultimately, Owens confessed to being complicit in a crime, telling an entirely new story. According to him, Zeb was killed by his own uncle, Walter Owens, who had been hired by Wesley Smith to eliminate Misty's new boyfriend, whom he still loved. Robert claimed he was unaware at the time, and his uncle had asked him to lure the young man to a secluded spot. When the three of them ended up in a wooded area on the road to Leicester, the uncle ordered them to stop the car and then to signal Quinn to do the same. Once the young man stepped out, Walter shot him silently and then instructed his nephew to help dismember and package the body, which was burned on Robert's property that same night and encased in concrete. Interrogating Walter Owens was no longer possible, as he had died several years before his nephew's horrific confession. No evidence was found at the supposed crime scene, and the story sounded very unconvincing. Legal proceedings, plea agreement, and final verdict. Initially, Robert faced charges of first-degree double murder, murder of an unborn child, dismemberment and concealment of evidence, burglary, and robbery. All these charges could have led to the death penalty, but it was revealed that the defendant had long suffered from depression and mental disorders, taking powerful medication, which his lawyer used as a foundation for defense. Thanks to a well-constructed defense strategy, the accused could have been found insane and sent to a psychiatric clinic instead of prison, which neither the prosecution nor the victim's relatives found satisfactory. At the same time, the investigation into Quinn's case began, from which the criminal might also escape unpunished. In 2017, the defendant agreed to a plea deal, admitting guilt in the murder of the Codds in exchange for a guaranteed removal of the death penalty from potential sentences. For this case, he was found guilty of second-degree manslaughter, dismemberment, and incineration of bodies, burglary, and robbery. In total, he was sentenced to 59 years in prison. In 2022, Owens made another plea deal with the authorities, this time regarding Quinn's case. However, he only admitted to complicity in murder and assisting in hiding the evidence. For this crime, he received an additional 12 years, added to his already effectively life sentence. After the sentencing, the murderer addressed the court, asking forgiveness from the relatives of the people he had killed. He again spoke of his innocence, attributing everything to an unfortunate accident, inciting his mental disorder and the influence of strong medication, which impaired his judgment. However, the relatives of Christy and Joseph Codd, as well as Quinn's family, did not believe him. They have never reconciled with the term unintentional murder and believe that in both cases, the man acted deliberately and for selfish motives. Story 6. On November 20th, 2018, an English backpacker named Grace Mullane arrived in New Zealand on a 2-week trip after spending a month and a half in South America. But just 10 days after she landed in Auckland, she suddenly disappeared, leaving her loved ones concerned. What initially began as a search for a lost tourist became a homicide investigation, and the details that followed were harrowing. A man named Jesse Kempson was arrested and charged with murdering Grace Mullane. How did Grace meet Kempson? Why did he kill her? And how did the authorities reach him? Watch this video until the very end to find answers to all these questions and discover shocking details about the case of Grace Mullane. Hi there, I'm Mark. We're looking at a story that captured headlines around the world. A case that began as a young woman's adventurous backpacking trip soon spiraled into something far darker. Grace Mullane had come to New Zealand to explore its stunning landscapes and culture. But within days of her arrival, she vanished. What started as a search for a missing tourist soon turned into a haunting investigation, uncovering a string of disturbing clues that led authorities down a chilling path. What came next were twists, hidden truths, and a trial that revealed details even seasoned detectives struggled to comprehend. This is the case of Grace Mullane. Grace Emmy Rose Mullane was born to David and Julian on the 2nd of December, 1996 in Wickford, Essex, England. She was the youngest of 3 siblings and shared a very close bond with her parents and her 2 older brothers. Being brought up in a down-to-earth family, Grace was a humble, caring, and fun-loving girl who was loved by everyone in her family and friends. After attending St. Joseph's Catholic Primary School, Brentwoodderson Covenant High School, and St. Thomas More High School, Grace Mullane went to the University of Lincoln for higher studies. There she graduated with a degree in advertising and marketing. Throughout her educational career, Grace was a popular kid among her peers because of her personality, confidence, and outgoing nature. It was because of her full-energy nature that, in 2018, she took a gap year after graduating and decided to explore the world on her own as a backpacker. Grace had a high school boyfriend when she started university, but the couple broke up in the first year of college. Grace was an independent and confident single woman and openly discussed her sex life with her friends. According to people close to her, she told them she had a particular interest in BDSM and enjoyed having rough sex. She had accounts on different social media platforms and was part of several fetish communities online. In her posts in those groups, Grace expressed her openness to experimentation. One of Grace's former sexual partners also told the media that Grace had practiced BDSM with them, but she was always very careful about the physical and psychological effects. Since Grace was open about her sexual likings, she often worried that her openness might lead her to trouble someday, as it made her vulnerable to sexual predators. And that is exactly what happened while she was on her backpacking trip in late 2018. But before we move further, if you had interests or likings that could land you in trouble, would you share them with your friends or keep them close to your chest? Let us know in the comments below. Grace was an extremely hardworking person and was passionate about art. She would frequently post her paintings on her social media and participate in art exhibitions. After exploring her passion for art, she wanted to experience traveling around the world alone. This is what led to her taking a year off from her routine and going on a solo world tour as a backpacker in October 2018. She used her savings to buy tickets and started off her trip from South America. Peru was her first destination. During her trip, Grace regularly posted about her activities on her social media and frequently talked to her family. She traveled to other South American countries as well and remained in the continent for 6 weeks before leaving for New Zealand in mid-November. According to her family, Grace was the most excited about exploring New Zealand during her trip and planned on going to Fiji and Australia too before ending her trip and returning home. On November 30th, 2018, Grace Mullane checked into a hostel for backpackers called Base Backpackers. Ever since breaking up with her high school boyfriend, Grace was active on Tinder, and that continued into her international trip too. On the night of her check-in into Base Backpacker, Grace matched with a man named Jesse Kempson on Tinder. She talked to Kempson over messages for a while before deciding to meet with him the next day, December 1st. While Grace agreed to meet him, she didn't like his advances. But eventually, Kempson persuaded her to meet him at the Sky City Hotel. At 5:30 p.m. on December 1st, Grace left her hostel and went to meet Kempson at Sky City. Since she was new to both the city and the country, Grace hoped she would have a fun night out, but things didn't go as planned. The next day, on the 2nd of December 2018, it was Grace's 22nd birthday. Since she was close to her parents, other family members and friends, her loved ones started sending her birthday messages as soon as the date changed. But there was no response from her, and this was unusual from a person who shared dozens of pictures from her activities with her friends and family every single day. When Grace's parents tried to reach out through calls, her phone was going straight to voicemail. Soon, her family knew something was wrong because it was unusual for Grace to miss calls or leave her phone unattended for long periods of time. The family kept trying her number for the next 2 days, but when no one received any response from Grace, they decided to contact the Auckland police. On December 5th, 2018, Grace Mullane was reported missing, but the police didn't show much urgency to find her initially. The reason is that the police believed that Grace might have stayed with some newly made friends after a night out. Another assumption was that her phone might have died and she would contact her family soon. But when the authorities contacted Base Backpackers Hostel to get information about Grace Mullane, they were surprised to know that she hadn't checked in after December 1st, the day she left to meet Jesse Kempson. What was even more surprising was that all of Grace's belongings were still in the hostel. The Auckland police now expedited their search for Grace Mullane. They began gathering CCTV footage from the local bars, hotels, and restaurants. This is when the authorities discovered that Grace had last gone to Sky City to meet someone. The CCTV footage showed that Grace was approached by Kempson, confidently, but then he hugged her in an awkward manner. After the exchange of greetings, the two left the place and went towards Andy's Burger Bar. The footage obtained by the police didn't just capture Grace meeting Kempson, but also showed what happened in the following hours. In the bar, while enjoying their drinks, the couple looked as if they were having a good time, and Grace's actions didn't show any alarming signs. Both Grace and Kempson embraced each other on multiple occasions, and even kissed a few times. Fast forward to 9:40 p.m. on the same night, and the CCTV footage shows the couple heading towards Jesse Kempson's apartment. Grace looked extremely comfortable with her date, and it seemed as if the two had known each other for years. Their arms were wrapped around each other, showing the young couple had a good night out. Up until that point in the CCTV footage, everything seemed normal except one thing. While the couple was in the bar, Grace left her seat to use the restroom, and as soon as she left, Jessie Kempson immediately started going through her belongings in the purse that she had left on her seat. While on the date, Grace was in touch with her friend in England, Amina Ashcroft. While Amina's statements later revealed that Grace was having a good time with Kempson and liked her date, she also told her texts. It was clear that Grace was pretty drunk. Amina also revealed that while she saw some red flags in Kempson when Grace described him, she didn't say much because Grace was having a good time. Grace told her friend that she clicked with her date well, and in her last text, she told Amina that she would contact her tomorrow and let her know what happened next. Up until this point, the authorities didn't know exactly who Grace's date was, but when the police were going through Grace's social media, they noticed that soon after Grace returned from the restroom, a person named Jessie Shane Kempson commented on her Facebook profile picture, with the comment reading, "Beautiful, very radiant." That comment was what led the authorities to their suspect linked to Grace's disappearance. The 26-year-old Jessie Kempson was born on December 28, 1991, in New Zealand and grew up in Wellington. His parents separated when he was 9, and afterwards he was mainly brought up by her father and his grandfather. The police investigation later revealed that Jessie had a volatile upbringing with trauma, the complete opposite of Grace's childhood. When his family and friends were interviewed, nobody seemed to like him, and almost everyone called him a compulsive liar. Jessie's stepbrother told the police that he was a pathological liar who loved having power over people. So much so that Jessie had even lied to some people that he was dying of cancer. His landlord told the police that he initially believed that Jessie was a top manager for a company called Woolworth and was making 6 figures a year, but that turned out to be a lie when the landlord found out that Jessie hardly left the apartment building, and it was the state benefits that were paying his rent. Jessie had lied to multiple people about his profession. Some people thought he was a successful businessman, while others believed he was a professional softball player. In reality, Jessie was working as a telephone sales operative. What was more interesting was that he was fired from his job for lying on the same day he met Grace Mullane. Immediately after connecting the dots and identifying Jessie Kempson, the authorities knew he was their person of interest, and there was some link between him and Grace's disappearance. The investigators went to Jessie's apartment building, but he wasn't there. After a while, he arrived at the building, but as soon as he saw the police, he hurriedly turned around and tried to hide his face from the officers. One of the officers spotted him and chased him as people stood by and watched. The police eventually caught up to Jessie and brought him in for questioning. When Jessie Kempson was asked about the events of the night Grace Mullane disappeared, he told the authorities that he met Grace at Sky City because he didn't know whether or not Grace was a real person, since a lot of catfishing also goes on Tinder. He further shared that when they ended the night, the couple gave each other a hug and a kiss and went their separate ways after agreeing to keep in touch with each other. The investigators didn't buy Jessie Kempson's stories because of the CCTV footage they had seen. According to the footage, Jessie and Grace got off an elevator and headed towards his apartment. When the authorities searched Jessie Kempson's studio apartment and looked into him through different sources, they discovered that he had an unusual personality. He was estranged from his family and also claimed to have been diagnosed with anxiety recently. What caught the investigators' interest was a post on Jessie's Facebook profile from a couple of weeks before he met Grace. In the post, he was extremely apologetic and asked for forgiveness from all the people he had wronged. In one of the sentences of the post, Jessie wrote that his arrogance and selfishness had affected his relationships with people in his personal life. Jessie seemed to have shown red flags to almost everyone who had interacted with him, including the girls he had dated. All of them described him as overbearing and controlling, even if he had just started seeing them. He initially portrayed himself as a sophisticated and well-dressed person but soon showed his true colors. He repeatedly asked his dates about their sexual experiences and tried to get as much personal information from them as possible. The authorities went through nearly 6 terabytes of data from the CCTV footage and closely looked at each and every one of Jessie Kempson's movements on the 2nd of December 2018, the day Grace Mullane was supposed to celebrate her 22nd birthday. The cameras in Jessie's apartment building captured him getting into an elevator at 8 a.m. on the 2nd of December. He was alone and went into the building's lobby before heading towards the atrium on Elliot. After a few minutes, he arrived at the atrium and went to the baggage section to get a suitcase. After that, he got some cleaning supplies before checking out. Around 11 a.m., Jesse Kempson went to a car rental company in Auckland and rented a red Toyota Corolla. Jesse's behavior throughout the day was unusual. The authorities were surprised to see that just a few hours after getting the suitcase and cleaning supplies, Jesse went out on a date with some girl, but it wasn't Grace Mullane. The police were able to get in touch with Jesse's Tinder date on the 2nd of December and interviewed him to get any information that might lead them to Grace Mullane. The girl told the authorities that throughout the date, Jesse Kempson had made her feel extremely uncomfortable. She also revealed that Jesse talked about buying a large duffel bag for sports equipment and even discussed the topic of murder with her. He told her that it was both interesting and crazy that one wrong move by a murderer could land them in jail for the rest of their life. Have you ever discussed a topic as bizarre and scary as murder on your first date with someone? Comment below and let us know. Jesse Kempson told his Tinder date that he knew a guy who had asked his girlfriend to have rough sex with him that involved strangulation and suffocation. He then revealed the experiment went wrong and the guy tried to revive the girl, but it was too late by then. Eventually, his friend was charged with manslaughter. While it was already disturbing enough for his date, Jesse went on with his story and told her that the police dogs can only sniff dead bodies buried more than 4 feet below the ground. By that point, it was clear to the woman that she wasn't on a date with a usual guy and immediately wanted to leave the date. When she was leaving, Jesse Kempson offered her a ride home, but she declined. Kempson was unfazed by what happened during the date and went on with his day as usual. He collected cleaning supplies and rented a rug cleaning machine. He told the employees of the rental company that he was renting the machine for red wine stains on his carpet. The CCTV footage showed that Jesse Kempson returned to his apartment building a little before 9 p.m. on December 2nd and took the cleaning machine to his apartment. Jesse was back in the building's elevator at 9:30 p.m., but this time with a trolley that had 2 seemingly heavy suitcases on it. He packed the suitcases in the trunk of his rental car before returning back to the lobby. Around 7 a.m. on December 3rd, 2018, Jesse Kempson went on another suspicious shopping trip where he bought a shovel. He then went to a dry cleaner and dropped off the suitcase before heading towards the car wash. The CCTV camera at the car wash showed Jesse power washing the car before returning it to the rental company. On December 5th, 2018, CCTV cameras around the city captured Jesse Kempson dumping bags in different dumpsters in Auckland. On December 6th, Grace's father flew to Auckland to help the authorities with the search for his daughter. He also pleaded with the public to help find his daughter. In a press conference with an official from Auckland Police, David Mullane understandably looked heartbroken and stopped on multiple occasions to regain his composure. The police official told the media that they had found a person of interest linked to Grace's disappearance. During his first interview with the Auckland law enforcement authorities, Jesse Kempson had told the investigators that he had last seen Grace Mullane at 10 p.m. on the 1st of December when they said goodbye to each other and never saw her again. He also told the police that she had blocked him on Tinder afterward. When the authorities interviewed him again after a few days, Jesse's story had changed. During the second interview, he told them when the couple returned to his apartment, they were very drunk and started making out. He then told the officers that Grace suddenly turned the music down and started talking about 50 Shades of Grey and bondage. He said that after the talking was over, they started having sex, and after a while Grace told him that there were a few things that she liked doing during sex and had experienced with her ex-partner. After that, Grace started biting him and asked him to bite her as well. He asked her if she was sure about it and she consented to it. Jesse continued with his story and told the authorities that Grace then spanked him and then held him around the neck and choked him. She then asked him to do the same to her. According to Jesse's version, the two of them were on the floor by the time they were finished having sex, and he then went to the bathroom to take a shower. He said he accidentally fell asleep in the shower and when he woke up and came back to the bed. But since the room was dark, he couldn't see or feel Grace. He assumed she had left. But he was shocked when he woke up the next morning and found Grace lying on the floor with blood coming out of her nose. Jesse repeatedly insisted that they had just had violent sex and he hadn't murdered her. When the police searched Jesse Kempson's apartment, they found that the carpet was saturated with Grace's blood, which told a different story than the one Jesse had shared. When asked about Grace's body, he agreed to take the police to the spot where he had buried her. Grace Mulline's body was found in Waitakere Ranges, 12 miles west of Auckland at 4 p.m. on December 9, 2018. While talking to the media, Detective Inspector Scott Beard told the media about discovering Grace's body. He mentioned that they had found a body they believed to be of Grace and that the formal identification process would be initiated. Although the identification process had not yet started, the investigators, based on the evidence that had accumulated over the past few days, determined that it was Grace's corpse. Detective Inspector Scott Beard also stated that this time would have been unbearable for the Mulline family and sent condolences to them. Jesse Kempson made his first appearance in court on December 10, 2018, and was charged with murdering Grace Mulline. But his identity was suppressed because of an appeal by the defense that automatically triggered an interim name suspension for 20 working days. While the media outlets in New Zealand could not publish his name or other details, identity suppression could not be enforced outside New Zealand, and different English newspapers and channels published Jesse Kempson's name in their reports. On January 16, 2019, Jesse Kempson appeared in the Auckland High Court where he pleaded not guilty. His identity still remains suppressed pending an appeal by his lawyers. The Auckland High Court heard the appeal on February 7, 2019, and reversed its decision, indirectly ending Jesse Kempson's name suspension. The trial for Grace Mulline's murder began on the 4th of November, 2019, and the autopsy report presented in the court was horrifying and showed that Grace had been strangled. Not only that, she also had bruises on her arms and chest as if she had been pinned down. It was also revealed a pressure with considerable force was applied to Grace's neck for nearly 5 minutes, which led to her death. The police report also showed that Jesse had lied to the authorities during the investigation. On the night of December 1st, when Grace was murdered, Jesse didn't accidentally fall asleep in the shower. Rather, searched for the hottest fire, flesh-eating birds, and Waitakere Ranges on his phone. But that wasn't the only thing he did on his phone. He even took intimate photos with Grace's dead body and browsed different porn sites. The prosecutors argued that Grace's death wasn't the result of rough sex gone wrong, but rather it was deliberate, intentional, and calm. The investigators also told the court that Jesse would have killed someone else if it wasn't Grace Mulline on the night of December 1, 2018. On the 21st of February 2020, a jury consisting of 5 men and 7 women unanimously found Jesse Kempson guilty of the murder of Grace Mulline. He was sentenced to life in prison with a maximum non-parole of 17 years. On the 22nd of December 2020, Jesse Kempson was formally identified after New Zealand's Supreme Court rejected his appeal for continued name suspension. It was only then that the public knew that he had been convicted of a total of 9 charges that included sexual violation, rape, and threatening to kill. Grace Mulline's death attracted unrepentant public attention, and the Prime Minister of New Zealand publicly apologized to Grace's family. The Mulline family gave an emotional media statement after the court verdict came in. They stated that every member of the Mulline family and those who were friends with Grace would welcome the verdict of murder. They also emphasized the suffering they had endured over the past year and mentioned that the verdict, although welcomed, would not reduce their pain. Grace Mulline was killed around a year before the verdict was announced, and since then the entire family and lives of those within it were ripped apart. The brutal killing of Grace is one that will stick with the family for the rest of their lives, and Grace will forever be remembered as a beautiful, talented, and loving daughter. She was the family's sunshine, and she will be missed. That was the case of Grace Mulline. As the rain falls and the night deepens, thank you for being here with me at Radio Night Crime. True crime stories remind us of life's mysteries and the need to stay aware, even in the stillness of the night. If you enjoyed tonight's story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Let the sound of the rain lull you to sleep, and until next time, stay safe, stay curious, and let the night keep you company.